So we've switched gears. Here we are in the final chapter of the course, the 6 debates over macroeconomic policy. Throughout the past 15 weeks, we've been talking about macroeconomics, which is the study of the greater economy. We looked at it from a macro level, from an economic perspective, looking at things like the gross domestic product of the country. We looked at how households and firms interact with each other. We looked at a lot of policies, both monetary and fiscal. We also looked at a lot of supply and demand to understand how the economy works. That was the whole reason why we went through the past 15 weeks. Now, as you know, economics is the study of the economy. That's what economics is. It's the study of the economy. It's to say that a lot of what we learned for the past 15 weeks is very philosophical. Uh, it's mostly science. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of math behind it. There's a lot of science behind it. But there's also, a lot of thought. So there's competing thoughts in economics. Not all policy makers agree with each other. Yeah? You see that. Look at Congress. That none of them can agree with each other. So a couple of debates that you need to be aware of in macroeconomics. Number one is, should monetary and fiscal policymakers try to stabilize the economy? This means more government intervention. Changes in aggregate demand and supply will lead to short-run fluctuations in production and unemployment. When it comes to monetary and fiscal policy, this can lead to shifts in demand, but it will also have impacts for their influences on the fluctuations in production and unemployment. So, yeah. So what's the good side of that? Well, if policymakers try to stabilize the economy, when the demand is too small, there's going to be periods of high unemployment, which will lead to more government spending, tax cuts, and expanded money supply. Things maybe, I don't know. So a more stable economy is good for everyone. That's the idea. But the reason why they should not do that is because every time the government introduces a policy, it takes like 6 months for it to actually occur. The minute the president signs something into law, it's not effective right away. You don't feel it right away. Delay. It takes like 6 months before you feel it. So fiscal policy, it's a long political process and it takes a really long time. And it's very difficult to forecast. So it's challenges. Oftentimes people do the opposite and conditions change very regularly. So, that's the challenges we have. The second debate, the government fight recessions with spending hikes rather than tax cuts. So here we have two different presidents, two different parties. George W. Bush, economy was started slipping into recession in 2001, so the president and the administration got together and cut taxes. President Barack Obama, 2009, during the time of the Great Recession, introduced stimulus packages. Household got checks at the time. There were tax reductions and increases in government spending. But it's also important to note that both those presidents were faced with very different economic conditions at the time. So should they fight things with tax hike? Spending increases. Fundamentally, it's a good idea. And yeah, it can lead to an end in recession. However, um, there's oftentimes employment things considered. When it comes to the monetary policy, we when it comes to spending hikes, of course, the first line is the first line of defense when it comes to an economic downturn to spend more money. If the government spends money, that means more people are working in order to fulfill whatever it is the government spent money on. When there's an increase in the money supply, there's normally a reduction in interest rates, reduction in the cost of borrowing, increased spending on investment, and increased aggregate demand. Normal. We know that's not necessarily always true. So, what about cutting taxes? That's a great idea. So, when the government cuts taxes, it leads the households to spend more disposable income. You have more to spend. The government didn't take your whole check to pay your taxes. It increased on spending and consumption. Mostly good things. Of course, there's also increased government spending, which is a derivative. So, also on the positive side of things, when it comes to spending hikes, the multiplier effect. We talked about this, I think it was last week, the multiplier effect where higher incomes leads to higher spending leads to better hiring, more hiring leads to more spending, etc. Cycle repeats itself. This is a very useful tool because it's very effective. Also, positive things with greater spending from the government, at least what happened in 2008, 2009. The Reserve cut interest rates to almost zero, which meant that pretty much anyone had the ability to borrow. It'd be beneficial to them because they didn't have interest rates to compete with. So, increased government spending oftentimes leads to a better benefit than a decrease in tax collection. Every dollar of taxes cut, a dollar might be saved rather than spent. However, when the government spends a dollar, it adds to the aggregate demand. In 2009, President Obama's administration, for every dollar of tax cut, increased the gross domestic product by 99 cents. Another penny was saved. Yeah. But it's also important to note that every dollar that the government spent in purchases increased gross domestic product by $1.59. That's because of the multiplier effect. $100 billion in stimulus packages saved more than 3 million jobs. So, three types of government spending. One is called shovel-ready projects. Those are projects for infrastructure. The second is called federal aid to state and local governments. We saw that in the CARES Act that President Biden signed into law, where the federal government gave money to the states and local jurisdictions in order to help them to balance their budgets. And the third type of government spending is increased payments to the jobless. In other words, an increase in the unemployment insurance system. Those three types of spending are only good things. So, what's the bad thing with cutting taxes? Why shouldn't we cut taxes? Well, if we cut taxes, it increases the aggregate demand because households have more income to spend. But by altering that incentive, the individuals might be more interested in investing, saving, rather than spending. This leads to an increase in the aggregate supply. Employed incentive is to search for jobs, and employed to work longer hours. Why should the government not cut taxes during the time of recession? Government spending multipliers have smaller impacts on consumers when the higher taxes in the future are cut back by spending today. In other words, if the government cuts taxes, they cannot keep spending. They're not bringing in as much money. So less government spending today leads to higher taxes in the future. Okay. Firms reduce expectations of future profits, which leads to reduced investment today. With government spending during times of recessions is that there's a fast increase in spending. Oh yeah, the bridge to nowhere. Here in Baltimore, that was a fiasco. They built a inner city highway system that built the bridge, and the bridge didn't go anywhere. It was literally a bridge to nowhere. It's also what we call the golden toilet effect, where the Department of Defense spends money on literally golden toilets and puts them into places that you've never heard of. And of course, careful and deliberate planning leads to long lag times, long delays. So that was the second debate. The third debate: should monetary policy be made by rule rather than discretion? So we have the Federal Open Market Committee, which helps to set monetary policy. It's mostly done by discretion. They meet every 6 weeks to evaluate the state of the economy. In the short term, they can impact interest rates by making recommendations to raise, lower, or change them, or leave them unchanged. And Federal Reserve adjusts the money supply. So the good side of making monetary policy by rule instead of by recommendation, it doesn't limit the competence of abuse of power. And of course, during the political business cycle, central bankers align with politicians. Discretionary policy can lead to economic fluctuations. I don't know why this is a positive. I would say that this would be a con. The idea is that if it's made by rule rather than committee, that would lead more toward like a dictatorship type situation, which is something that we don't want here in the United States. Other problems with this: it might lead to more inflation, higher than desired. Inconsistencies with policies among central bankers and other politicians. There's no way to get to zero inflation, and that the short run trade off between inflation and unemployment will be negatively impacted. Yeah, I don't know. Monetary policy should not be made by rule because, and this is on the negative side, Federal Reserve has various circumstances. It's better to appoint good people rather than to conduct monetary policy on their own. Give them freedom to do so. So yeah, good things. Alleged problems with discretion are largely hypothetical. Okay, fourth debate: should the central bank aim for zero inflation? No. Prices rise when the government points that there's too much money. Yes, that's what caused inflation. Society facing short-term trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Yes. So on the good side, why they should aim for zero inflation? Two other costs associated with reduced money holdings. So in other words, lower interest rates on savings. New costs associated with more frequent adjustment of prices. It's difficult for retailers to keep changing their prices. Increased variability of relative prices. I mean, on the good side, yeah. But what are the other costs of inflation? Unintended changes in tax liabilities, confusion and inconvenience resulting in a change of unit of account, arbitrary redistributions of wealth. Yeah, these are all costs of inflation. So how do we reduce inflation? We know how to do it. Temporary high unemployment, low output, increased interest rates, increased inflation, reduce it. We increase the interest rates in order to reduce the inflation. That's one of the tools at our disposal. In the long run, there's no trade-off between inflation and unemployment. We know that. There's temporary costs and permanent benefits. The bad side, benefits of zero inflation are really small. I mean, the sacrifice ratio and social costs of reaching zero inflation are very large. Small inflation is usually a good thing. We want it to be around 2%. This is my favorite debate. Number 5, should the government balance its budget? Yeah. The government spends more than it collects. It covers the budget deficit by issuing government debt. Bonds, usually. It affects savings, investment, and interest rates. It should balance its budget. These are old numbers. It's much higher than this now. It's $52,000 per person in the United States to cover all of the government's debt. That's a lot. In 1980, it was $712 billion. In 2018, it was $15.8 trillion. Today, I believe it's close to $18 trillion. So government debt, the direct effect is to place a burden on future generations. The future generations are going to have to pay for the previous generations' mistakes. Macroeconomic effects is lower national savings, and future generations have lower incomes and higher taxes. So we've been running a budget deficit in this country since Bill Clinton was in office. We've had it at times of war, during temporary economic downturns. Not all budget deficits can be justified with war or recession. We've been running a deficit since 2000. Government needs to balance its budget. It's real simple. In 1980 and 1995, the government actually did a good job balancing the budget, believe it or not. Increases of 26 to 50% of gross domestic product. There were no major military conflicts at the time, and no major economic downturns at the time from 1980 to 1995. Of course, there were temporary recessions, etc., but nothing crazy. Causes of a balanced budget: it's easier to increase government spending than it is to increase taxes. Nobody likes to increase taxes. Budget deficits in recent years: the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the pandemic, the recessions of 2001, 2008, 2009. It's important that we don't just keep spending money that we don't have. So the government needs to aim for a balanced budget. To do that, this would lead to increased national savings, increased investment, and better all over economic growth. The problem is the government debt. Often exaggerated, yeah, kind of, but at the same time, it's a lot of money. Government that tax burden on younger generations. It's not large compared to lifetime incomes, but it's still a lot. Lifetime income of an average adult in America is $2 million. That's how much you'll make over your lifetime. The debt per person at the time in 2018 was $48,000 per person living in the United States. That's 2.4% of their income over their lifetime. Doesn't sound like a lot. Today it's a little higher. It's $52,000 per person, and it's more like 3% of the total income. So budget deficit is just one piece of the pie. Depends on how the government decides to raise and spend money. You know how they raise it, it's through taxes. How they spend it depends. Need to be more fiscally responsible. The fiscal policy, of course, this will have an impact on future generations. The government cannot continue to raise debt forever into the future. It's impossible. Of course, the burden will become greater and the economy will continue to shift over time. The country's ability to pay back its debt will also become more difficult. Debt can continue to increase in the future. It'll lead to other problems, yeah. Lower national income, and of course, the real output of the U.S. economy will go at 3%, but it's not as high as it could be. Inflation should be around 2% per year. That's what we consider to be normal. Incomes should continue to grow about 5% per year, although we know that's not probably true. For the most part, I think it's close to 3% at best. Real output continues to grow at 3% per year. Government debt can continue to rise 5% per year without increasing ratio for debt to income. I personally disagree with that, actually. So yeah, a lot of money to be paid back in the future. We cannot do this forever. It will eventually lead to a major financial crisis. And of course, it's impossible to reach for 0% interest. Should tax laws be reformed? This is the sixth debate. To encourage national savings. It depends on the ability to produce goods and services. You know, that's what ultimately impacts the ability to save and invest for the future. National savings rate is determined on long-run economic prosperity. The better off you do, the more you're going to save. Yeah. The U.S. tax system discourages savings. Yeah. The tax return to savings is heavy. Taxes, some forms of capital income twice. We'll call it double taxation. Where you're taxed on capital gains and you're taxed on your normal income. We also have inheritance tax as high as 40%. Overall, the U.S. tax system, in my opinion, needs to be overhauled. It's simple. The policies and institutions discourage savings. The tax code is complicated and very difficult to navigate. But as it improves over time, of course, this will lead to preferential treatment to some retirement savings and consumption tax. Distribution of the tax burden, tax policies to encourage savings would include things like an increase the tax burden on people who cannot afford to save, and it may not be effective. because of a substitution effect or income effect. And the other ways to increase national savings would be things like no tax breaks to the rich. National savings would be equal to private and public savings. There would be increased public savings by reducing the budget deficit and increasing taxes on wealth. It's one way to balance the books. Okay, that, my friends, is the conclusion of the 6 debates over macroeconomic policy that are continuously debated in Congress and here in the United States by our citizens. Please stand by because for the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about the final exam. So please hold on. Hold on. Don't go anywhere. Stand by, please.